Today's video we'll be taking a look at this 1998 dual Pentium Pro workstation.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. Oh yeah, ancient electronics, we cover it all.
So today's video I think is an interesting one, and it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. Now, for longtime viewers of the channel, my primary thing that I'm interested in is retro gaming on real vintage hardware. So primarily games. And that seems to be the consensus with most, retro computer enthusiasts. It mostly centers around games. But a build I've just wanted to do for a very long time because I was very curious was the Pentium Pro. So the Pentium Pro came out about the same time as Socket 7 CPU. So we're talking about the Pentium 133 to, the Pentium 233 megahertz. And the Pentium Pro, it had like more L2 cache on the chip, I believe. They were also 32-bit as opposed to 16-bit, and they were focused primarily on server workstation type market and not home and gaming use. And there was a lot of boards came out. A lot of them had dual processor slots for SMP, dual processors. This was before when you had like dual core, where you had one processor with multiple cores. You had to actually have two or sometimes four physical processors. So a lot of these Pentium Pro boards have dual processor slots. They're really interesting CPUs. They're larger than the Pentiums at the time, and just interesting CPUs. And I just wanted to always build something around them. And I've had some of the parts for a while, but I finally accumulated all of the parts I needed to make this build. So this is going to be an interesting video because, again, I'm dealing with a socket and a type of motherboard, and I don't really build workstations. So this is going to be a little bit of a learning experience for me. So that said, this is actually the finished product. I've actually finished this build. The thing is, I went back and I went into editing and I realized I didn't do an intro for this video. So I'm doing my intro here. So there's going to be some peculiarities in the video. For instance, I'm going to talk about stuff like picking the case badge and CD-ROM, and it's going to change throughout the video. This is what it ends up in the final build. But in case you're confused, I do use a different CD drive through most of this video. So that's the story behind that. I'm actually filming this segment last. I believe in the video I do refer to it as a 1997 workstation for a while, and then I realized it's actually more of a 1998 workstation. So the final build here is going to be a pretty high-end 1998 Pentium Pro workstation. So it's a cool video. I hope you stay and watch through the whole thing. If workstations aren't your thing and you're, like a lot of us retro computer enthusiasts, you're more into games, don't worry, I got you covered. Even though this is a workstation build that I'm putting together, Pentium Pro, we still do a lot of testing and with games. So it is still game focused. So stay tuned. There's still going to be some game stuff, a lot of game stuff later in the video. Alright, so let's start this journey. Alright, so this is the motherboard we will not be using, actually. Before we look at the motherboard I will be using for this project, I actually wanted to take a quick look at a similar dual Pentium Pro motherboard that I won't be using. And this board is very similar to the one I'll be using. As you can see here, it is AT form factor, so it has an AT keyboard connector. And it has a few things kind of on the board, but through these, kind of cables. We've got parallel and serial ports here. We do have built-in IDE right here. And there are two voltage regulator modules, one here and then one way up here. Of course, Intel chipset. Here is the RAM. I don't know exactly how much this can take, but it is a Taiwan motherboard, and it's model S1662. I guess if the other motherboard I'm planning to use kind of doesn't work out, it fails, I can use this as a backup. The Pentium Pro chip is under here. Of course, this is a dual socket 8 board, but I only have one Pentium installed in this really nice sort of blue heatsink. But let me take this heatsink off so we could take a peek at the CPU, because I want to compare the CPU in this to the ones on the board we will be using. Alright, so there we go. I have taken the heatsink off and I have uncovered the Pentium Pro underneath. Now these are quite large chips. Let me flip this board around. These chips are, well, that didn't help. Well, it helped a little bit. I was going to say the voltage regulator module's in the way, but these are quite a bit larger, if you couldn't tell from the socket, than regular Pentium chips. And scrappers tend to love these CPUs because of the gold.
I love gold!
Everyone loves the gold content because he's got these big sort of gold, well, first of all, it has more pins. It's just larger. There's just more gold content. Geez, let me see if I can get this guy out. I don't even remember the speed of this one. It's on here. It's right here. We can take a look at that in a moment if I can get this thing out. Okay, so yeah, this is one of the faster Pentium Pros. This is a 200 speed, and it has 512K of cache on the chip. So, you know, for when this came out, I think this one came out in 1996, this specific Pentium Pro. These look, especially when you compare it to a regular CPU from the time period, like, this is just so much more impressive. Okay, so here is, this is a regular Pentium. This is a Pentium MMX 233 MHz, so socket 7, compared to the Pentium Pro. So these are pretty much contemporaries. This is actually like 33 MHz faster, and yeah, I'm sure it's feeling very intimidated right now by the Pentium Pro. But these are just very, very impressive, at least to look at, CPUs. Now, this is the motherboard that I'll be using for the project. This is a Tyon motherboard as well, or Tyon, however you pronounce it. This is the S1668D, and it's essentially the same motherboard. I believe it has the same amount of slots here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PCI and 3 ISA, although I do believe this slot here is shared. I think that's the same as the other one. It's also dual socket 8. I think it's pretty much the same. It has a 440FX chipset. I don't know what the chipset on the motherboard we just looked at was, but it might be the same. They're pretty much contemporaries. This also has a copyright date of 1996, just like the other motherboard. The main difference with this board is the form factor. Whereas that motherboard was AT, this one is ATX. So it just makes things a little bit easier for me. We have we have PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard, and the ports are a little bit more elegantly implemented, I suppose, rather than being on those cables. It also uses an ATX power supply right here connector, so it just all around makes things easier for me. So that is why I have gone with this motherboard. Over here we have the two voltage regulator modules. Here on this board they're side by side, whereas the other one, I think they were in like two different places. So I just like the implementation on this board a little bit more. It feels a little bit more organized, other than it being ATX. Now we do have a dreaded Dallas real-time battery right here for the CMOS settings, but it does appear that it is socketed. So if it is dead, which I believe it is, it should be fairly easy to replace. No soldering required. Floppy connector, primary IDE, secondary IDE, and then we have our memory right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this motherboard can support a maximum of 1 gigabyte of memory, which is incredible for the mid-90s. And it should be, I believe, it is fully maxed to 1 gigabyte. So yeah, I believe these are all 128 megabyte sticks of memory, so that should bring it up to a full 1 gigabyte. So now we're going to take a look at the Pentium Pros on this guy, because they're a little bit different from the last one that we looked at. We kicked it up a little bit on this motherboard. Alright, so These heat sinks don't look as cool as the last one, but I do want to reapply the thermal paste. I mean, it's not hard as a rock or anything, but it could use some reapplication here. But if we look at the chip itself, it does look a little different from the last one. Not quite as cool looking. So let me get off some of this thermal paste and then we'll talk about this Pentium Pro. Alright, so what we have here is also a 200 megahertz Pentium Pro. But these are kicked up a little bit. If you remember, our last 200 megahertz Pentium Pro had 512K of cache on board. These ones have a whopping 1 megabyte. So you can see it's a little bit different. They have this integrated heat spreader on them that covers it. So it doesn't look as cool in my opinion. You don't have the big gold, you know, I don't know what you want to call that, heat spreader or top or cap. So you don't have all the gold on there, but you do have this nice integrated black heat spreader. But you're getting a whole 1 megabyte of onboard cache with these later Pentium Pros. I think these are the last true Pentium Pros that they released. This came out in '97. I think the gold top Pentium Pro, 200 megahertz Pentium Pro came out in '96. So they did come out with like a sort of Pentium Pro overdrive, which was I believe it was based on the Pentium 2 that you could put in here. I don't have any of those, but as far as just like not overdrives, just like pure Pentium Pros, this would be the top of the line, these black top ones with the 1 megabyte of cache on the CPU. Other than that, they don't look too different. But yeah, these are getting a little bit harder to come by. You can still find them on eBay. I remember they were even years ago, these were still going for like $50 a pop. I think prices on these have gone up a little bit since then, but it was nice this board came with 2 of them. So yeah, I'm going to take off the other one here. I'm going to reapply some thermal paste, and then I'm going to reinstall everything, and then we're going to talk about a case that I can put this guy in. Now, I don't know, it's a little bit subtle, so I don't know if it will pick up on the camera here, but I have noticed a slight color difference between these two CPUs. This one's a little bit more grayish, where this one's a little bit blacker. So that's interesting that there's a slight color difference. I'm trying to look if the model number or anything is different, but it looks the same. So it doesn't seem to make the same. I mean, this number down here is different, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. This number up here seems to be the same on both of them. So whatever. I just thought it was an interesting observation. Alright, so I've reapplied some good high quality MX4 thermal paste. Everything's been reseated here. I think the smart thing to do actually before I put it in the case is just throw on a video card for testing and a power supply and just see at least if we get a post. I had tested this board in the past and it did post. So hopefully it's still posting. This is always the most, the part of the process that always gives me, you know, even though I've done it a ton of times and like 95% of the time it's always fine, whenever I take out a CPU or put it back and reapply thermal paste and the heat sink fan, it always makes me like a little bit nervous. Like, maybe I did something a little bit wrong, or maybe a pin got bent or something. I always feel that way. So just to save us a lot of effort, I'm going to test this thing out. Now, if it does fail, not only do I have that last motherboard I showed you, but I actually have the AT version of this motherboard. So theoretically, if something happened to the board and the CPUs were still good, I could pull these CPUs, put them in the AT version of this board, and then I would just have this board but an AT version. It would be a little teeny bit more of a headache for me, but it wouldn't be that bad. So we do have a backup. Okay, so got it set up. We have our IGS PCI video card here. Got it hooked up to a more modern power supply, so shouldn't be any issues there. So I just have to figure out which of these pins I have to tap to get it to fire up, and then we'll see if we get anything on the monitor. Alright, I was getting a little worried there. I forgot. I believe after referencing the jumper chart for this, I believe the power switch is right here, switch J1. So this should fire it up. Yep, there it goes. We do have Titan Pro version 5.1. Got a BIOS state of 98. Pentium Pro at 200 megahertz. So, okay, good. I didn't screw anything up. So it is posting. It is counting up that massive 1 gigabyte of memory. So, good. Okay. So we know it's working. Now it is just a matter of finding a nice, suitable case for it. So let's talk about this case, too. This case, I don't remember where I found it. Probably a swap meet. And the reason I picked this case is, well, I don't know. I originally wanted to go with a large tower. When I think of the Pentium Pros and the workstations from the mid-90s, I think of like large, imposing, or interesting looking towers. And I had some of those, but they weren't really scratching the itch for me. And then I had this thing sitting around, and it's a desktop. I like desktops. Usually people go with the towers for the Pentium Pro, but like this is a big desktop. Maybe you don't. It's hard to realize from viewing with the, but this is a very big desktop. I believe when I first acquired this desktop, what was in here was like dual slot 1 Pentium 3s. So this was a workstation type desktop case, but it's pretty cool. I think it fits our theme for like a workstation, and yeah, the Pentium Pro motherboard fits very nicely in this case. I will say there is a weird thing about this case, how it opens. You actually don't take the screws off in the back and slide this top off. You actually have to take the faceplate off, and then there's screws you unscrew, and then the top case lifts off. So it's a little bit annoying getting into it. Not sure why it was designed that way. Maybe just because they didn't want people inside of it. They didn't think you'd be going in there changing things very often. Because this was supposed to be, I think, for a workstation. So maybe that's why. It is a little bit of an annoying design choice, though, because it does make it a bit of a hassle if you want to get inside this and do any changes or work. Now, for being a later case, it actually does have a little actual speaker right here. This goes right here, and this would hold a case fan, which currently I don't really have any case fans to put in here. And then the speaker fits right in there. And although it is like half the size of the speaker you would find in, say, an older AT case, it's nice that there's an actual speaker in this case. Now, one other thing with this case is these are actually reversed. If you look at the case front here, it's power, well, hard drive activity is on the right and power is on the left. And usually the power LED is green and the hard drive activity light is orange or red. Someone had reversed these at some point, or maybe it came like that. I don't know. It looks like clips. I could probably easily swap these and just put the green over here and this orange over here, but I'm feeling a little lazy, so I'm probably gonna leave it like this, at least for now. So I don't know if some of you were watching the video and you've seen that and you're like, oh, that's weird, the power LED is the orange. It's just these lights are switched, but like I said, it looks like little clips. It should be really easy to just swap them, fix that issue, but I may or may not do that. And now the big decision, and that's the case badge. So I have two dual Pentium Pro stickers here. One is sort of that silver backing and one is clear. And then there's a question of where to put them. Now right here is for the case badge, but these are too small to put here. So I could either put it next to it, or I'm also thinking like over here under the button. I'm thinking maybe the clear one would look kind of good just under the power button. I think that's what I might do. I might go with this clear one under the power button. Maybe if I ever find a case badge I can put here. I don't know, something random. For all your case badge needs, by the way, I got these from Geek and Spiel. He has a website if you need, like, case badges for, many processors, operating systems, graphics cards, all that good stuff. You can find them at his website for a very reasonable price. So yes, I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with this clear one here right under the power button. So anyways, my goal with this build is to build a period correct workstation. I am setting my limit at about 1997, and I'm going with 1997 because this the chip I'm using here is the last of the Pentium Pros. We'll look at that in a minute more closely, and it came out in 97, I believe, and it was, I think these chips were almost $3,000 each, so this is a dual setup, so at the time we would have had almost $6,000 just in the two CPUs. There is a overdrive Pentium Pro that I think is 300 megahertz, and it's actually based on a Pentium 2. I don't have any of those. Interestingly enough, years ago I had an opportunity to buy one really cheap, and I was like, oh, I'm never gonna need that, and I passed it up. I think it was like 30 bucks or something. I'm still kicking myself for that, but whatever. What I meant by it's not going to be very useful to me is because, like I said, these were for servers and workstations, and this channel and my main interest is gaming. Supposedly, because these are fully 32-bit chips, I think I'm saying that right, a lot of programs like an MS-DOS that are kind of more 16-bit, for more 16-bit oriented, may actually run slower. So even though these Pentium Pro chips have more cache than their regular Pentium equivalents, I have read that in mostly DOS games, they will run probably about up to 5% slower than their actual regular Pentium equivalents, just because these are optimized for 32-bit software. So, and a lot of DOS software is 16-bit. Although I believe there is 32-bit like DOS extenders and managers and things like that, so it depends on the game. But yeah, certain games in DOS, these may run actually slower than their equivalent. Also very limited on operating systems if we're going with dual systems. So under DOS, the second CPU will not be utilized at all, and that's actually true under Windows 95 and 98 as well. It may as well have a single socket, single CPU system. It's just using up extra electricity, I guess, with the extra CPU. Unfortunately, the pre-2000 era, we do not have a lot of software and operating systems that support SMP processing or dual CPUs. I think the earliest game actually is Quake 3? Quake 3, I'm thinking, was the first game really that will support SMP, and that's already probably at the edge of what these CPUs can handle. So on the software side, kind of pointless to have two of them. And like I said, because they were oriented toward workstations, basically the only operating systems are going to be non-gaming type operating systems. I think for this, I think the most appropriate operating system would be Windows NT 4.0. Could go with an earlier version of NT. Don't really want to. Could go with Windows 2000, but that would be kind of really pushing what these CPUs can handle. Even though I'm sure they could run Windows 2000, I do want to go period correct with 1997-ish. So I have never ever worked with NT 4.0, so I have no idea what to expect, how things work, how drivers work. I have no idea. I think once I have this board set up and we're working with it, I'm probably going to install just plain old DOS. Do some stuff on there, do some benchmarks and tests just to see, and then from there I will install Windows NT. I'll either just reformat and start over with NT, or maybe I'll make a separate partition or something. We'll see. Okay, so we are all installed in the case at the moment. I have the power LED, and I have everything hooked up here more or less. Haven't connected up the floppy or IDE or anything like that yet. Our power supply here, it's a little newer. It is not a period correct. That's fine. You can tell right away because it has SATA connections and extra connectors for CPU power, which are not going to be needed with this build here. But that's fine. Newer PSU should be more reliable. Anyways, pretty much works exactly the same. I do like this case. It is desktop, but there's a lot of room to work in here. So I guess the first order of business is going to be looking at the sound and video, and also since we're going with Workstation, I might go with a SCSI card and drive. I am running a little bit low on SCSI drives and controller cards, so I'm not 100% sure with that. If not, we're just going to go with some sort of IDE drive. But let's try SCSI first. But first, let's talk about possible sound card and video card. Alright, so let's talk about a sound card. So, I don't know, this probably would have been, sound wouldn't have been absolutely necessary. I assume it would be pretty low on the priority list, so someone building a workstation really wouldn't devote a lot of money or resources or thought to a sound card. Let's assume, obviously, I'm going to want a decent sound card, so because I'm going to be trying some games on here, and I would like some decent sound. But let's assume someone putting this machine together wanted at least basic sound. My first thought was just a standard Sound Blaster 16, but then I actually remembered the ESS audio drive, and I think this is a good card that sort of ticks the boxes. It's a very compatible card. I think this specific one came out, this is an OEM one. It uses the ES1868F. It doesn't have a Yamaha chip on there, but it does do pretty well with emulating the FM. Some games the FM on this card may even sound better. 1995 card. This ISA 16-bit, this probably would have been pretty cheap in 1997. Maybe you found one used or discounted. And incidentally, as I said, it also kind of fits our bill as a sort of good, decent card, at least for some DOS gaming with its FM synth. And pretty good compatibility. A lot of people, these are kind of their go-to cards for DOS. Adequate sound for Windows. And like I said, it would have probably been, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this probably would have been a pretty cheap option if you were putting together a workstation and you just wanted a cheap sound card for basic sound. So I think this works out well. If we wanted to do the high end, that would be something like an AW64, an AW64 Gold, but I really don't think someone putting together a 97-ish workstation would really have cared much about the sound card and putting in the most expensive sound card, unless they were planning to game on the machine as well as do work, which obviously is a possibility, or they just had money to burn and they were like, I just want the best of everything. But realistically, we're going with a workstation build. The ESS, I think, fits the bill just fine. So now for looking at what video card to go with. Matrox is sort of the first video card company that comes to mind when you're looking for sort of more workstation-y oriented video cards for that mid 90s time period here. So I have a few of these. Like personally for myself, these Matrox cards from like the mid 90s, they all sort of blend together. They're all very samey, maybe up till the G100 or the G200, but the cards they were putting out slightly before that, like the Millenniums and the Mystique cards, they all sort of blend together for me because they're all very sort of samey, with the same sort of features and whatnot. So we'll be taking a look at a few here. Now these Matrox cards, or I believe Matrux cards, they're very well known for their visual quality. The image produced by these cards is generally top-notch. I also can tell you firsthand, they are very fast in 2D acceleration. I've put these in DOS machines, and they are very fast. You can get some pretty high 2D benchmarks scores with these cards. Very fast at 2D. On the downside, though, they do tend to have some compatibility problems. I don't think they do too well with things like transparencies. There's probably a specific name for that feature that these cards just don't support. So where you'll get things in some games, maybe like spotlights or shadows, it will look sort of like a checkerboard pattern. If you know what transparencies kind of look like on the Saturn, it kind of reminds me of what these cards look like with transparencies. So 3D capabilities, not the greatest, same problem. They're just missing some sort of like features that other 3D accelerator cards from the period had. So you may get games that if they don't run, again, even in Windows with 3D, or you'll get some glitches, they'll look pretty strange. So excellent 2D image quality, excellent 2D speed. maybe not so great with 3D abilities. But yeah, there you go. Generally, any of these cards are really good for pairing with, say, a Voodoo 1 or 2, because the Voodoo will take care of your 3D for the most part, and then you will get really good 2D image quality with these cards that kind of offset the whole sort of pass-through technique that the Voodoo 1 and 2 uses when it connects and displays. Now, it's also worth pointing out that Matrux did have its own API with these cards. I think it was called MSI. So think of like the Voodoo had Glide, and if a game supported Glide, it supported the Voodoo, and its special sort of proprietary 3D instruction set. So the Matrux cards also had that. I don't think the list of games is huge that support it directly, but I don't think it's actually super small either. So you have that option with some of these cards anyways, where if it supports Matrux's special MSI API, well then you can run your game in that. Now, this is going into a Workstation-ist Pentium Pro Windows NT build, so I don't know how useful any of that's going to be, since this isn't going to be a gaming-oriented machine, but it's worth mentioning. So quickly go through these really quick. This here is the earliest one. This is a Matrux Millennium. I believe it's 2 megabytes of memory on board. This is actually right here. If you look right here, it uses this IS Storm chip. So this is an earlier Millennium as well. So it's a little bit slower, I believe. There are Millenniums that have more advanced chips here that may be a little bit faster. I believe when LGR did his video where he a few months ago, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, when he did a similar Pentium Pro build, this is the card he went with, and it's a good pick. Again, solid sort of workstation card, great image quality, but it has all those issues we talked about earlier. Now, a little bit after that, we have this guy here, and this is a Matrux Mystique. Again, this is a 2 megabyte card here. It was supposed to be a little bit more gamer oriented. If you remember the box they sold these in, it had that famous like creepy clown on the cover that I always thought was super creepy. So I believe this supports a little more features than the Millennium as far as like 3D acceleration goes. So you might have better luck with this card as far as glitches. Games might look a little bit better with this guy here. And again, same excellent 2D image quality. I believe the clock speeds are higher than the Millennium, so this is just kind of a gamer-ish oriented card compared to the Millennium here. I also want to point out these here, here, and here. These are to add memory. They have little proprietary memory daughter boards if you want to add more memory. I think these can be maxed to 8, I think. You'll also notice they all have these little extra connectors here. These are not for like Apple monitors. I think those are for special dongles, and you can connect to multiple monitors. So lastly, we have the Millennium 2, and this is from 1997. And this has a whopping 4 megabytes of memory on board. You'll also see the little memory connector is different than the other cards. So you can't just get a memory daughter board and it will work for all of these. It's specific to the card. So this is the Millennium 2, and this card is more or less basically just like the Mystique here. I don't think it adds any sort of features or anything like that. The RAM is a little quicker. I believe the type is quicker, but the clocks are a little lower. So these are actually about equal in speed depending on the software. So these cards should probably more or less perform mostly the same. Of course, the advantage here with this one is it has 2 more megabytes of memory on the card itself. I think this can be expanded a little bit more with the daughter board. I think maybe this can expand up to 16 megabytes. I don't remember exactly though, but yeah. So of all these cards, I will be going with the Millennium 2. Since we are doing a 1997 build, this is a 97 card. And you know, this was also where this one was, they went from like workstation oriented to they wanted to make more of a gaming card, and then this one when they went back, this was still this went back to more of a workstation-y card. So we're gonna go with this guy here. Technically, I believe the G100 was out. The Matrux G100 I think came out in 97 as well. I don't have one of those. I used to. I don't have one anymore. I might have went with that card if I had it, but that was probably a little, it wasn't a gamer-oriented card, but I believe they did add features to that card, so you'd probably get less glitches than you would with this card here, but it's irrelevant. We're going with a Pentium Pro workstation build, so Millennium 2 it is. So quick clarification, I guess, after doing a little bit more research on the Millennium 2 and Matrox's API, the MSI API, I believe it stands for Matrix Simple Interface, I think, that used for some games. So compatibility should be, the Millennium 2 should be compatible with the MSI API, but it was really developed for the Mystique cards. That was like their gaming card, so I mean that makes sense that there'd be a special like API that games would use for 3D, and that would be kind of tailored for the Mystique, which was their gaming card. Now, as I said, the Millennium 2 is very similar to the Mystique, so this card is compatible with the MSI API, but it's not perfect from what I've read. So a game that you use the MSI API may or may not be compatible or fully compatible with the Millennium 2. So it's a little bit hit or miss. I'm not really making a gaming build here anyway, so I don't particularly care, but for reference, there you go. Let's talk about hard drive solutions. So this is a workstation build, so obviously I want to go with SCSI. Around this point in time, we're talking about the late 90s, SCSI was starting to really kind of lose its advantage it had over other types of, like IDE primarily. IDE was just getting better and faster, and SCSI still had its advantages. I think in general it was still faster, and like things like obviously like DOS, you could see a bigger hard drive, so they did have that like space advantage. But other than that, it still had its downsides, noisy, a little more complicated to set up, things like that. But like I said, workstation, so we're going to go with SCSI here. We're going to go with Adaptec. I don't even know if there were any other options when we got into like the PCI sort of late 90s era as far as SCSI controllers go. I know at earlier times there were things like, I think, Future Domain or Domain Future or something, Bus Logic. They made SCSI controllers, but it feels like, especially when we get into the late 90s, Adaptec seems to be the only show in town that I can think of. I'm sure there's others, but they're kind of like the default if you want SCSI controller, and they're common and well supported, and they seem to work well. So I've got this PCI controller here. I think this is from like 95 or 96. This is the AHA 2940W, and it supports the 50 pin, and also I think they call this like ultra. So this supports 50 pin, and then I think they call this ultra wide. And then I also have this card here too. This is the AAA 131, and it supports the same sort of SCSI on here, but it has this memory stick on here. I don't know. I think this card came out in like 97-ish, so it's still within our time period here. I don't know if I think this is like onboard cache or something. I don't know if it really makes it run any faster than this guy here, but I'm going to try to use this one here just because I think the little memory module on there is pretty cool. And then if it doesn't work, we'll just go to this guy here. As for drives, I tried several drives closer to the period, and they weren't working. Actually, I was trying just a lot of SCSI drives in general, and I was getting like, they were being detected, but it said drive detected, but not set up or not configured. And then when I tried to format it, they gave me all kind of errors. So finally, I did come across this guy here. This is a Seagate ST34520W, and it uses that ultra wide connection here. And this guy seems to work here. I don't know the date on it. I have a date code here of 9946, so I'm guessing maybe that's 1999. Little bit out of our time period, but we can let it slide with this guy. It has the look of an older SCSI drive. It's also quite small for the time. This is a This is only a 4 GB drive, which is kind of small. I think even in 97, on the high end, you could get something like 20 GB SCSI drives. Pretty expensive for the time, but yeah, this is kind of on the small end for a SCSI drive from the late 90s, but we're going to go with it. This drive is also pretty quiet too, which is a good thing. I have another one that I tested that does work, this IBM UltraStar, and it's 9 GB, but it's from the year 2000. So I was thinking about just going with this guy here, but it's very noisy, and I don't think we don't really need more than 4 GB anyways. So we're just gonna go with this guy here. So after I had DOS installed and everything was up and running, I went in to do benchmarks, and I quickly discovered I had a problem with the Matrox Millennium 2. Unfortunately, whenever I would run any game or benchmark at a slightly higher resolution, say 800 by 600, I would get these strange lines through the program running, and my guess is maybe half or some of the memory was bad, so when it was using that extra memory for these higher resolutions, it was triggering these glitches. So unfortunately, I couldn't go with that, so I had to nix the Millennium 2. I wanted to make sure it was the card, though, not something else, so I did install the Mystique, since the Mystique is very similar to the Millennium 2, and even with less memory, the Mystique had no problems with the higher, in quotation marks, resolutions like 800 by 600, and it did display them correctly. However, this was a workstation build, and the Mystique just didn't feel right. I really wanted to use something more like the Millennium 2, because, I don't know, the Mystique it was really more of a gaming card, so I didn't really feel right using that card. Although I will say that even doing some more testing, the Mystique had its own issues. For instance, when I tried to play Tomb Raider, it was a very interesting experience. I can only describe it as playing Tomb Raider in CGA mode while high on mushrooms. And I kind of liked it. Thankfully, I have a friend that helped me out with this project here, and he gave me this Matrox Millennium 2, and this one actually even has the memory module on it. So I think this is a 4 MB card, and I think this adds 4. So I think this is an 8 MB Matrox Millennium 2. Now there are cards where I believe there's some versions of the Millennium 2 that I think there's 6 on board, and then you can upgrade it to 12, but I'm pretty sure this is a 4 MB upgraded to 8, so this is actually even better than what we originally started with. So I'm going to install this card and run the checks, and hopefully this doesn't have any of the problems that we had with the previous Millennium 2. So with a whopping 1 GB of EDO RAM, it does take quite a long time to do a memory test, so with a machine like this, you probably want to be skipping the memory test here, but yeah, here's the post screen. As it goes on, it will detect, it actually says Pentium Pro, 200 MHz times 2, detects the dual CPU, and it gets into DOS 6.22 just fine. Now, as I said earlier, I just want to reiterate, all these DOS tests, there's only one CPU being utilized. DOS does not support SMP processing, nor does Windows 95 or 98. So that second CPU, it's just being noisy and burning electricity. It's not affecting these tests at all. As for BIOS configuration, I just left it as is. I didn't tweak memory settings or anything. There's not a whole lot of things in this BIOS. I wouldn't say this is a rudimentary BIOS, but there's not a whole lot of tweaking you can do. But there does seem to be some tweaking, maybe with memory, some timings, if you want to do that. I did not mess with this in the slightest for these benchmarks and for all the gameplay. Alright, so I've started using a slightly newer version of Phil's sort of benchmark pack. Here is CPU ID. It actually gives a little bit more information than the older version. So for you CPU guys, you can look through there. There's all the info on the black top Pentium Pro 200 megahertz. There's also some other nice things with this newer well, it's probably not for quite some time, but I've just started using it. Like Doom, for instance, it will just give you the FPS count. You don't have to make the calculation. But anyways, let's take a look and see what we got with some of the benchmarks here with the Pentium Pro. So this is system info, just running the standard CPU. Obviously the fastest thing here is the Pentium 166, so the Pro is going to absolutely blow it away. Let's take a quick look, I think, at SpeedSys and just see what it says. Now, interestingly, in SpeedSys, when it looks at the Millennium 2, it only sees, looks like it only sees the 4 megabytes. It doesn't see the full 8 megabytes, but there is the stats here from SpeedSys. So now let's take a look at what I got in some of these benchmark tests. Alright, so here are the benchmarks for our Pentium Pro workstation in DOS. I don't really have anything to compare them with. Like I didn't do like a Socket 7 that was similar as possible, so I can't really compare, but here's the numbers, what you think of them. I was going to do a graph, like, you know, my graph that I usually do, but I didn't really see a point because I did test a few other cards in this Pentium Pro system. For instance, I tested a PCI Voodoo 3, and the results were pretty much identical. So I do think we're hitting some kind of bottleneck here. I also tried a PCI S3 Trio 64 Plus, and results were pretty much identical, like slightly slower in Doom and Quake. At least Quake at 360 by 480. The Trio was a little bit slower, but I really think we're hitting some kind of bottleneck here. But yeah, the Millennium 2 and the Voodoo 3 were pretty much the same. Now at much higher resolutions, maybe that would change, but on the DOS benchmarks I ran here, pretty much the same. So these seem like pretty decent results. But let me know what you guys think. So I have noticed, I think my volume settings for my ESS audio card were a little bit low. So these captures, the volume came out a bit low. So I just want to make you guys aware, when I do go into the audio editing for this video, I am going to try to amplify them so they're a little bit more like audible for you guys. Tomb Raider this time worked just fine, although it wasn't quite as trippy as on the Mystique. I have to say with Tomb Raider, the sound card setup, when you hear Lara Croft go like, right, let's go adventuring, I always, like, my brain associates that little soundbite now anytime, personally, I go on anything I would consider an adventure. Yes. Time to start a new CRPG.
Right, let's go adventuring.
Time to wipe out another helpless group of PCs.
Right, let's go adventuring.
Time to head downtown to that shady neighborhood to pick up a 40-year-old computer.
Right, let's go adventuring.
After installing a patch, Tomb Raider did run on the Millennium 2 in the MSI 3D accelerated mode. Unfortunately, my capture device just did not like it, so it wouldn't direct capture it. So this is right here, just me pointing the camera at the CRT screen, but it did indeed work. As I mentioned earlier, though, effects like Laura's shadow here on the 3D accelerated mode with the Matrix does have that sort of checkerboard sort of look. There were issues, however, going forward. Some games, especially older games, just didn't seem to work. For instance, Halloween Harry gave like a strange error when I tried to run it. And I also couldn't run MemMaker in DOS. It was giving me, it would make the adjustments and it would restart and everything would look fine. And then I would get some kind of like a memory, some kind of weird error. I forget exactly what it said. And it seemed like there was either like way too much memory, like the 1 gigabyte was just freaking out DOS in certain situations, or I thought maybe some of that memory was bad and it was triggering this issue. But after playing with this machine for quite some time, I had no issues with the memory other than when I was running things like MemMaker. So it was perfectly stable. So I really think it was more of just DOS not knowing what to do with 1 gigabyte of memory and just having some issues. Okay, enough of DOS. Now for the meat and potatoes of this build, if you will. It's time to install Windows NT 4.0. Unfortunately, I initially was having some issues, pretty much chalked up to the SCSI controller that I was using. Alright, so fortunately a small change with this build. I cannot get this SCSI controller card to work with Windows NT. It just isn't working. It either won't see the hard drive, or I did end up using another controller card and installing NT and then upgrading it to Service Pack 4. And I even found, with some help from people at Vogans, I found drivers for this card and seemingly installed them, and I just get errors when I try to boot up Windows NT with this card. So I'm going to have to switch over to this SCSI controller card here. Both Adaptechs. This one's a little older. This one's from 96, where I think this one's from 97 or 98. Again, in practical terms, I don't know if there's too much difference. It's the same kind of SCSI interface. I think it's like Ultra SCSI. It's the same interface. I don't know if this card's any faster. I just think the extra, like the memory on the board is kind of cool. But as far as like practical use, will I see a difference between using this card and this card? Probably not. I can just tell you that this card, Windows NT version 4, even with Surface Pack 1, had the drivers for this SCSI controller built in, and I've had no problems whatsoever using this one. But this one just isn't working. And yes, I do believe this one's more meant for like RAID setups, which I'm not doing anyways. Again, just thought the extra memory on the board looked kind of cool. So we'll be switching over to this slightly older Adaptech card. It's an AHA 2940 UW. So there you go if you wanted that information. Alright, so before I wrap this video up, I wanted to do one other thing to make this thing a little bit more 1998 workstation-y. And I think I mentioned I wanted to do this at the beginning of the video, but I was probably going to wait till the end. Well, here it is. This is my SCSI drive. This is a Ultraplex. I'm not sure. I think it's from Plex Tour. It is a SCSI drive from January 1998. So now the drive matches the rest of the machine. It's more workstation-y. It's SCSI. It does use the big 50-pin cable, so I've got both of them connected there. It's actually a caddy drive, interestingly. A little bit late in the CD-ROM game for caddy drives, but you know, I think that makes it more interesting. And it is indeed working. It is being seen by the system, and it's reading the disk in there. I think one of these will eject it, right? Let's see. Thought that was eject. Maybe this is eject. How do I get it out? There we go. So yeah, there we go. So now it works. So I'm gonna get that in there and set it all up, and then we have got ourselves a pretty much fully 1998 workstation. I mean, the power supply is later, but you know, what can you do? Floppy drive is probably later, but it's floppy drive is a floppy drive. But yeah, nice, very nice. I'm glad this worked. Maybe I should have done this from the start, because I had zero hassle. I connected it and it just worked. So nice. So this is my first experience with Windows NT. I did upgrade it to Service Pack 4. The disk with Service Pack 4 came out in 1998, so it's still within our parameters here. It's not some crazy update from, you know, the late 2000s or something like that. Yeah, NT is interesting. It does support both processors, so it does support SMT, systematic SMP processing, yes. Although that doesn't mean the games support it. Like I said, I think Quake 3 was the first game to support dual processors. So the OS supports the two processors, but doesn't mean the software or games you're running on it does. But at least it, you know, to a degree, it does support the processors. Interesting OS. It's almost like an alternate version of Windows 95 or 98. Very similar, but also very not. Again, it's not built on DOS. It is 32-bit operating system, not 16-bit. It does have like a virtual MS-DOS, but it's not really. It's kind of, I think it's like emulating MS-DOS. But yeah, interesting OS. Not really meant for gaming, although a number of games do work. But it was, like I said, it is a workstation operating system. Some of the things are, like I said, weird or missing. There's no device manager that I could find. Installing drivers usually isn't quite as straightforward. So the drivers for the Millennium 2 card, for me, work just like any other drivers. There was like an install, and you clicked it, and it installed itself, and it worked just like it would have worked under Windows 98. The ESS card drivers, though, I couldn't really figure out quite how to get them to work or install. What I did do is I went under multimedia, and then there's a selection of drivers, and you can add drivers there, but it wasn't working for the drivers I had for the ESS for some reason. But what I found out you could do is I just installed the drivers for Sound Blaster 1/2.0, and that worked just fine. So that's how I got the ESS working in NT. So I don't think it's going to support like any like higher functions of the ESS, but it's going to operate as if it's like a Sound Blaster Pro, which is just fine for our purposes here. So yeah, that was NT. I like it. It's interesting. I know a lot of people, from what I've read, really love this OS. But you know, I wouldn't recommend it as a gaming OS. But you know, it's light, it's fast, it's well suited, I think, for this dual Pentium Pro setup. So let's take a look at some me trying to play some games on this OS. Now the first thing I want to do is check out a DOS game. So here's Duke Nukem 3D Atomic Edition. Now I did watch LGR's video when he did a dual Pentium Pro workstation maybe like 7 or 8 months ago. And he played Duke Nukem, and he said it played, but it was very like slow and sluggish. And I wanted to see, seeing as I had a more powerful setup here, more powerful graphics card, and the CPUs were more powerful, I wanted to see if I would experience that same sort of slowdown. And I definitely did. So first of all, there's no sound. I'm not sure how you would get sound working in MT in the DOS. I couldn't figure it out. So no sound whatsoever. But it did feel weird, and I knew exactly immediately what LGR was talking about, because I was experiencing the same thing here. Even with a more powerful system setup, it was very sluggish and weird and like kind of like weighty, like the game had like a heavier gravity going on. So yeah, it is definitely playable if you don't care about sound effects or music, but it doesn't play quite the same. It's just a weird sort of sluggish, sort of heavy feeling when you play. But I mean, like, technically, in a way, I guess it was playable. Interestingly, some games that gave me issues under true DOS actually played under NT, for Halloween Harry, for instance. Now, of course, no sound, just PC speaker, but it actually played, whereas when I tried to run it under DOS 6.22, I got a weird error. Now, I think this might have to do with the memory. Maybe this game, just with the 1 gigabyte of memory, maybe it tripped something up under actual DOS and the game just didn't know what to do and it freaked out and threw me an error. But NT is handling that 1 gigabyte a lot better than DOS did, so maybe it's allowing the game to work. But of course, it has its own issues. For instance, just no sound, just the PC speaker sound. This game didn't really feel like it was running really slow. I don't have a lot of experience with this game, so I couldn't tell you, but it is a much older, much simpler game. So even with the issues with the Pentium Pro setup, it might be running at normal speed, just because in this instance, there's no 3D. The CPU and the setup is maybe just way more powerful than it needs to sort of run it correctly.
All right, well, let's test StarCraft, because if you look on the side, it actually specifically says it supports NT. So let's give it a try. See if we at least get some sound.
And as the box promised, StarCraft worked just fine under NT, with no issues whatsoever, sound and all. SimCity 2000 was another game that played without issues, although I couldn't find explicit support for Windows NT on the box. It ran without issue. And here's Quake 2 running just fine. Now, of course, this is software mode. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I believe NT 4.0 does not support DirectX or Direct3D. If it does, it's only the very low versions. But I don't know. It might not support it at all. It does, however, support OpenGL and Glide. So if you have a Voodoo card, you can run games with the Glide API. But yeah, that's a lot of problems you'll run into with games. It's the Direct3D sort of issue that you'll run into. OpenGL, though, modes, fine for 3D acceleration, and of course software mode, as you can see here, works fine. So when LGR did his video, he actually tested his original Matrix Millennium in OpenGL mode for Quake 2 at the lowest settings, and it was pretty much unplayable. I wanted to see with the faster Pentium Pro chip I was using, plus using the Millennium 2 with extra memory, I wanted to see if I'd get any better results, and no, not really. These are the same settings as LGR was using in his video. Lowest setting for resolution, I even forget what it is. My capture card won't even capture it. It's like 320 by something. OpenGL mode. And even with the little bit faster CPU, with the more cache, and the faster Millennium 2, it's not playable. I mean, it's maybe running better than it was running on his machine, but it's definitely not playable. Hexen 2 was a situation that, for some reason, it was giving me trouble playing in full screen mode, so I kind of had to play it in a windowed mode. Not sure what was going on there, but even in the windowed mode, it didn't really play, all that great. I think I was at 640 by 480. I was trying to play it, and even in that mode, it wasn't all that smooth or great. This also supports OpenGL, and much like Quake 2, the game was even more unplayable in OpenGL mode. It was just, I don't even think it loaded up. I just got like a black screen, or I got the initial screen. It's just the frame rate was so ridiculously low. It was obviously unplayable, but it was somewhat playable in software mode. Here's another one to try, Unreal Tournament. Now, this does officially also support Windows NT, but it also has the Pentium 200 as its lowest system CPU requirement. So let's see how this runs. This might be pushing it a little bit on this Pentium Pro machine, but we'll see how it works. At 640 by 480, even with the lowest detail settings, the game is playable, but it doesn't play well at all. Although, like I said, technically it's kind of playable. It is a bit chuggy. It just chugs along. Not a great experience for like a first-person shooter or a tournament shooter, but depending on your tolerances, you may find it somewhat playable. Obviously, the OpenGL version on this setup, on this graphics card, the Millennium 2, was, like the other games, completely unplayable. At 320 by 240, even with the high detail settings, the game is actually quite playable. Hideously ugly, but quite playable.
First blood.
So that was a look at my dual Pentium Pro 1998 workstation. So first, let me say what I think of Windows NT, specifically NT 4.0, because I've never used NT before. And I like it. It's not a gaming OS. If you want to play games, I would definitely not recommend Windows NT. Now, I was able to play a lot of games, especially if if you have a Voodoo in there and you're running Glide, OpenGL, if you have the right card, software mode, it's workable. You can work with it. It can play a decent amount of games. But if you're going for like the DirectX stuff, that's going to have issues, and there's just a little bit more hassle and incompatibility. If you want to play games, retro games, I would recommend, again, DOS or, Windows 95, 98, and then run DOS through that rather than Windows NT. Now, Windows NT seems to be great for what it's designed for. It is a operating system for workstations and maybe even everyday use. 1998, 99, if you were just checking emails and just doing, house stuff, regular stuff, you weren't really worried about playing games, NT seems like it would have been a pretty good choice. It seems very stable. It's light. It's fast. I like it. I had issues with it. The drivers, like installing drivers, it was kind of hard to figure out. I didn't find it super user-friendly, but I kind of account that more to me just not being used to the operating system. I haven't used it, so I don't think it was the operating system itself. It was my inexperience with the operating system. So I can't really use that as a dig against NT. It worked fine. I didn't really have many issues with it. Like I said, I did, but I'm chalking that up to just my inexperience rather than the OS. I've read online, a lot of people seem to love Windows NT, and there's even people that do game on it, although it would not be my first choice. I would suggest if you want to run NT, especially if you have something like, a Pentium Pro or something with dual processors, that's maybe a little bit too old for like Windows 2000, then maybe I would suggest doing like what we did here and do like partition the hard drive and do a dual boot. You can have one partition with like DOS or Windows 98 or whatever, and then you have your other partition with Windows NT, and that way you get the best of both worlds. Like you saw with this machine, I installed DOS on one partition. I could upgrade that to like probably 98 if I want to, and then after that I did install NT, so I get that boot option when it starts up that I can pick between NT and, well, right now DOS. So that's what I would recommend. It's a workstation OS, and it does support the dual processors. And that's the thing. With the 90s machines, if you have dual processors, you're kind of stuck. You're very limited with your operating systems. And probably your best bet is probably with something like Windows NT, because at least there you do get some kind of support, game support, and it seems to be the most compatible, but most of that dual processor stuff is wasted. None of the games support it anyways. When you're running something like DOS, you're just burning power with it. So I don't know. As for the Pentium Pro, I think it was fine. I mean, this machine overall is fine. It is a novelty, though. I just wouldn't recommend a Pentium Pro setup for if you're gaming. It's a novelty, and even if you have a single processor, let's say you remove the processor if you have a board with one slot. I think you're going to get the same performance or better with a standard socket 7 board and a standard, 233 megahertz MMX or something. You have more upgrade options. You can go up the line with the K6 CPUs, and it's just going to be cheaper and it's going to be more available. I would not recommend tracking down a Pentium Pro for retro gaming. Socket 7, I think, would be the way to go for that era, more or less. If you want something around that time frame, I would say Socket 7 definitely over something like a Pentium Pro or, Pentium 2 or something like that. It was fun, though. It was a fun build. I liked I like going with the theme of the workstation, and it worked out. I didn't have a ton of problems with this build. There were some weird issues with the DOS, probably with the massive amount of memory. There were some, incompatibilities, and then even in NT with games like we talked about, there were some, incompatibilities. But overall, it seemed like a pretty decent workstation. I think this case is interesting. For a desktop case, it is very big. It screams like big, like Pro, like Pentium Pro, or dual Pentium 2s or dual Pentium 3s or something. So yeah, it seemed to work out okay. Yeah, so it was a pretty fun build. Wouldn't recommend this build for retro gaming, as I've said 10 times already, but it was a fun build, and I hope you enjoyed the video. So I'm curious what you guys think, comments, suggestions. There are things you could do to improve this machine, even within my limits that I put, the 1998 limits. I could put in, I think the Voodoo 3 came out in 98. It might be 99. I'm not sure. But a PCI Voodoo 3, if it did come out in 98, would really help this guy out, especially with glide games. The Matrix G200 came out in 1998. I'm almost 100% sure. That card is probably significantly better as far as like features and power goes for games over the Millennium 2. So a G200 would be fine, and we would kind of keep our whole sort of workstation theme with the G200. So that's another option. So there's different things you could do. Also, before I wrap up here, if you are going to use something like this for retro gaming, if you want to increase your compatibility, I'd probably suggest cutting some things back. Like I probably, if you're running DOS on a Pentium Pro, I probably wouldn't put in 1 GB of memory. I would probably cut that back, at least to 128. Or less of memory. So there's just some things you could do that will probably increase your compatibility a little bit. So yeah, that's about it. So let me know what you think about this build overall, and I will see you in the next video, and thank you for watching.